we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And Kent, do you have a chalice lighting? Looks like you might be lighting a match.
You know I do. These words were written by Deborah Burrow. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace.
Thank you. Joy and peace. We could all use some of that.
Amen.
Hallelujah. The next item is to approve our agenda. Has everybody had a chance to review that?
Yes.
And is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve.
Thanks, Chris. Is there a second?
I
I'll second that.
second.
Any discussion? Okay. Anybody against approving? No. All right, it's approved. The next item is the consent agenda, which contains the September minutes, the committee reports, the educators report. Did everybody have a chance to review all that? And is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll take this one.
That was Mike, thank you. And a second? That would be Sam. I think he waved his hand. Okay. Anybody against the approving the consent agenda? Okay, so we're good. We'll move on to the board liaison reports. Does anybody have any reports? Chris?
I will say that the finance committee met last Wednesday, and I anticipate that Klaus, the finance chair, will be on the meeting this evening to talk with us about the first read of the budget for 2022.
Okay. Thank you. Any others?
Yeah. For the art committee, I haven't heard much from the building committee. I suppose there may be something around that as we've sort of moved back to in-person or partially in-person approach, but I haven't heard much from. I do request information, but I haven't heard much there. But for the art committee, we had an exhibition up for the last couple of weeks. It was taken down just, I think, well, it was last Tuesday or Wednesday I went and got mine. So there's another show going up that will include quilts, and those will be in for a while. I don't have the dates on me right now, but there's starting to be some activity there.
Very good. Yeah, it was a nice display. And I think people who were in the building enjoyed it and commented on it. Any other reports? Sam, did you have anything further on, or was that in the packet on technology? Not hearing you, Sam.
Right.
There you go.
All right. We have things up and running. We've made it through a few hybrid services so far. We have not worked out all the kinks, but all the kinks and flubs are minor, and most of them are in the category of user error, more mine than anyone else. And we've got Dan Haug on board now, who has successfully run video for one service. And so far we're heading in the right direction. The one problem that we have noticed with the system is that as we get other people into the fellowship hall and their smartphones connect to the Wi-Fi, and we have other computers around the building all connecting into the network, we've hit our bandwidth limit at times, and it has caused degradation to the solution to this is either A, to pay for a substantially higher internet service, which and B, to change our network structure from an uncontrolled sort of free-for-all for any device connecting to it to a more controlled system where we can say this device, you know, the camera, the video feed has top priority on the bandwidth, and cell phones, people's pockets, take whatever bandwidth might be left after the Zoom feed has all the bandwidth it wants. We've had that concept in mind as we were developing the new network systems, but to implement it fully would require a bit more investment, something between $1,200 and $1,500 worth of additional equipment. That's something the board wants us to pursue or wants us to look into further.
Okay, you're sort of fading in and out for me, but I think I'm understanding that with bandwidth, we're having some issues. And it sounds like technology is wrestling with what options there are, and it possibly will come back to us if you need a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I have a shopping list now. I emailed it to Bradley just a few minutes ago. Sorry, I should have done that a week ago. But there really aren't many options to it. If we want to go that route and have that extra control on the network, it will cost somewhere around $1,200 minimum, and then by the time that we add some extra wiring, bits and bobs, I would say that if we're going to approve it, it should be more like $1,500 just to do a wiggle room. That coming through is my microphone dodgy. I have to connect with a different phone.
I wasn't there on Sunday. Did people use the fireside room because the TV's up there now?
Just a minute, I'm connecting with my phone.
It looks like you're muted on both.
Does
Oh,
that come through more clearly?
yes.
All right, better quality microphone than my silly laptop. So the question, well, I'll start over again. The bandwidth right now is shared between every device in the building, which means that all the phones in people's pockets can suck up as much of it as they want and have no higher or lower priority on the bandwidth than the Zoom server, which has degraded the Zoom system quality at times. The solution is to switch from an unmanaged to a managed network, which involves roughly $1,200 of extra equipment. That would also include new access points, Wi-Fi access points, which would be managed as part of the same system. And that should allow us basically all of the network control that is possible within our walls. We're still vulnerable to what might happen at MediaCom's level, but there's nothing we can do about that. To answer your question, yes, we tried the system in the fireside room. We had that connect to the ongoing Zoom meeting after the service to see whether it was going to be workable using that instead of room 3. And I would say it was a success. We tried it with a few different people standing in front of it. And while the camera occasionally got slightly confused by other conversations that were happening nearby, it was not a problem. And we can sort of lock out the automatic zoom feature and just have the camera serve as a basic camera. And it was nice to have 3 or 4 people standing around there talking to the people on Zoom, feeling like they were part of the conversation. So yeah,
Very-
that's
Very
gladly
good.
got a good screen back on there now. So
Yep. It's not broken. Doesn't have broken glass.
And it didn't cost us a thing.
Even better, even better. Yeah, that bandwidth is kind of a scary thing on a Sunday morning. Would you
And
say so?
it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. Zoom does a good job of working around that problem. I mean, it's part of the Zoom infrastructure, but there were definitely times when the sound and video quality that was coming through Zoom was noticeably degraded from what we had in the room itself.
Mhm.
So if that's something that the board wants to pursue, I can hit order on a shopping list right now, or if we want to work on it further, we can write up more of a formalized proposal for that.
What do people think?
I think that we need to wait a little bit, kind of pump the brakes on any further spending for a few months because of the fact that we are just now finishing paying for the roof, as well as the current or recent AV project in the fireside room and the fellowship hall and stuff. And that's really done a number on our finances right now. So I think that we need to kind of wait a little bit. Bradley, what do you think?
I will be meeting with Larry early next week to work on improving our cash flow to cover some of the expenses that we've had and finish off the payments for the roof. So I don't think it'll be too long of an issue, too long of a problem. So Sam, you sent me your list, and I did have one question that kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah.
You have 3 access points. Are you thinking like 1 per level?
That was where I was going to start. Those are $100 a piece. I figured we'd start with 1, see how good of coverage we got, and if we find spots we need to add a second, then worry about that problem once it emerges.
So these things that we have right now, so if we get these new access points, does that negate the existing system?
It does not negate the existing system, but the existing system, it doesn't negate the existing system, but we can't fully control the network we want to, the way that we ultimately could if we use the existing access points.
Okay.
What it would end up being is in the final perfect solution here, we would have the Wi-Fi in effect on its own network and the
hardwired stuff.
Here, the hardwired stuff on a separate network. And as long as we're using the existing access points, they're all on one grand network, which they will still work, but we won't be able to control it as finally as we would otherwise.
Okay. So right now we currently utilize 5 different access pods
Mhm.
on the system. So to me, it would make sense to just throw those in, but if you want to experiment, I'm good with that too.
Okay.
I'm inclined to experiment just because I think that we can put the, if and when we get around to this, and please no one hear me as saying, oh, this is a problem that desperately needs to be fixed right now. It's working as is. We can deal with it as is. It's just we can do better if we so choose.
Well, it sounds like it would be prudent to have technology do a little bit more discussion on that and come back with a recommendation. And now's not the time financially to make a decision. So yeah, thanks
Fair
for
enough.
that report. Does anybody have any other reports? Bradley, I'm going to need your help with the nominating. I think there were 2 nominations.
Yep. We have the board at large spots filled. Kiri Saul and did Nicole say yes? Was it Nicole?
I think
believe
so.
so.
That's the one I couldn't
Um,
remember.
Okay. Nicole Olson said yes to that. We also have the vice president slot nailed down.
Yep.
Christopher Chase is going to fill that role. And they're still looking for a president and a treasurer for half of the term. Chris is not able to join us next year. I think that's it.
Yep.
They're
Well-
they kind of put a hold on looking for the endowment A&D folks, just because it's a larger committee and they're kind of working with the investment committee anyway.
Yep. So they're following more leads for
Mhm.
president and treasurer, and they've been meeting actively every week. And so I don't know what we'll do if we don't have a presidential candidate. I guess we can talk about that later. But yeah, that's the report so far. And Christopher Chase just agreed. I just talked with him on Saturday about the position for quite a while and told him, yeah, we sort of need to know soon. So I was really pleased that he accepted. So any other committee reports that weren't in the packet? Okay. Next item on the agenda would be the minister's report at 6:50.
Right on schedule.
You got that,
And-
Mike, for the process observer?
So I don't have anything to add to the written report that I've provided you, other than it's been really nice in our hybrid services. I want to note that we still are having about twice as many people on these virtual, on the streaming, as we are in last week. We had over 50 in virtual, and I think about 23, 24 in Fellowship Hall. So it's feeling more natural, and I think we're getting better at it every week. And if you have questions, I'd be glad to answer any of those, or if not, that would conclude my report.
Okay. Thank you, Kent. I would just like to take this moment for everybody to applaud. Yay! For hybrid services and the group effort and the success, and how much we appreciate the leadership of Sam and Bradley and Kent in getting us through a really new thing. really new and really challenging. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of time to get it all going. All right. And next on the agenda would be the financial report from Chris McClure.
Well, one of the big takeaways from the financial report is that our account has dramatically decreased, primarily due to the checks that we've been cutting to pay for the roof, as well as the audiovisual project overall that we have been paying as those bills have been rolling in. And I will say, though, that we are anticipating upcoming pledges this year, next year, and so on to refill the checking as well as the savings account. So it's just a short-term pinch. So I mean, we're still in good shape. It's just that because of those two projects that our finances look a little less healthy than they normally are. But I don't have any concerns at this time regarding that. And now, so far we have paid about $283,000 toward the roof project, and it appears that we still have about $16,000 to go to completely pay it off. And let's see here, I think that we have paid all that we need to for the project for the audiovisual. Bradley, are you aware of any other outstanding payments that we need to make to pay off the audiovisual project?
Nope. That big check from Klein was the big chunk. Everything else we've handled in-house, so it's been trickling in.
So I think that Bradley and Stephanie and Larry are having an ongoing conversation about any future transfers that we can make from endowment with respect to both of those accounts. But I think that for roof, looking at the change in equity, a pretty good chunk, like $76,000, has been transferred already in from endowment, right, to pay for roof. Bradley, is Larry, open to transferring any more?
Yes, yeah. That's specifically what we're going to meet about on Tuesday.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, so far they've sent over like I think 35,000.
Right.
Last month or the month before.
Yeah.
So yeah, the remaining bills it'll come ultimately from endowed funds.
Okay. So that's really the big news finance wise is the now that we are just about done paying for the roof and done completely paying for the audiovisual project. Now we're done pretty much with those two big items, and now any other big projects are going to have to wait a while. So anyway, I think that are there any questions about beyond that and what you see in the treasurer's report? If not, Sarah?
Is there a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
I'll motion
motion
to
to
accept
accept.
the report.
Thanks, Jane. And Mike, is that a second?
Yes, that's a second.
All right.
Jane and I are in competition tonight somehow.
Yeah. Is anybody against approving or accepting the treasurer's report? Okay, thanks. And thank you, Chris, for your close observation of our finances. We have a break for 5 minutes. That's what's next on the agenda. So we'll meet you back at 7. Well, I got 2 different clocks here. So 5 minutes.
Looks like Klaus is with us. Hi, Klaus.
Hello, can you hear me? Fine.
We could see you, or we could hear you, but can't see you though. It's kind of a,
Yes, I have the camera not hooked up yet.
oh, okay.
All right. So the next item on our agenda, we're just getting to some of our action agenda, and welcome, Klaus. The first one is the annual meeting agenda and rules. And I am not as well prepared for this as I should be. Here we go. So in the packet, there is, the meeting would be on December 12th. And we have to figure out what time it will be. It will be a hybrid delivery in the Fellowship Hall. Has everybody looked at the agenda from the packet? So a call to order, opening words, appointing a parliamentarian, approval of the agenda, and then covering the meeting rules. And the meeting rules are noted on that agenda. And as of November 12th, November 10th, we'll determine the quorum. And then we would have approval of the previous year's minutes, the vote on the fiscal year budget for 22, vote on candidates presented for election, then talk about the offertory split and vote on that, and special recognition for outgoing board members, and special recognition of any honorary life memberships that may come up, and then closing words and the extinguishing of the chalice. So is there any discussion about that?
I was wondering, yeah, go ahead, Sam.
We need to talk about the eighth principle. We've been discussing when we should vote on that for some time, and we've sort of defaulted to saying, well, I guess it'll have to happen at the annual meeting. We aren't going to call a special meeting before that. But if we don't have that on this agenda, that's going to be a problem.
The executive committee talked about that. We haven't really had much discussion on the board regarding the eighth principle regarding the survey results. And I think that's going to be coming up. And then we haven't had a lot of discussion beyond that within the congregation. And so when we talked about that at ELT, it seemed like we need to have a little bit more information and discussion opened up to the fellowship wide for people to be able to make a decision. And so that's why it wasn't put on the agenda at this time. Can you say more about that, Sam?
That's in effect the same answer that we had 9 months ago. We need to talk about it more. We need to discuss amongst the community more. We need to something more. I think, I mean, going to the survey results, more than 50% of the survey respondees already said we should absolutely adopt it now. There were less than 5% who said we should not adopt it. I think that we have a mandate at least to put it to a vote. I mean, I don't know what more discussion at a board level or at a congregational level is going to change anything, but I think that there are a number of people who have only not pushed on it this long because they figured it was going to be at the annual meeting. If we tell them it's not going to, we're going to push it off to some other future meeting, that's going to be problematic for some people. I know that. I mean, they've told me much.
Okay. Other discussion?
So if I remember right, maybe Kent can jump in here as well. There was some additional discussion happening and some additional materials coming out from the UUA that we were interested in seeing, which was sort of part of the discussion. Also, it was aside from, in the survey, aside from providing the wording of the 8th principle at that time, and I'm not sure whether it's changed or not, we didn't do any other preparatory work around, you know, holding a discussion. We essentially said, this is what it is. How do you feel about it? So personally, I'm not sure that's sufficient, but I'd be interested to know, you know, what kinds of issues people would have.
At the risk of going out of order, I mean, addressing the survey results was on tonight's agenda anyway. Perhaps we should look through those before we resolve this question, if that's all right with you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. So come back to this later in the agenda.
Yeah, because the survey results are directly relevant to answering this question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is everybody else okay with that? Okay. All right, let's do that. The next item on the agenda was honorary life memberships, and that's Kent.
Yeah, this is just a brief invitation for everyone to be thinking about, are there people in our congregation in the membership who may be worthy of consideration for this designation? Our bylaws say, upon the recommendation of the minister and or membership committee and the majority vote of the board of directors, a person who has demonstrated unusual support of the fellowship over a lengthy period of time may be voted an honorary life member, who shall have all the rights and privileges of an active member. Honorary life members are not included in the official membership number reported annually to the UUA. We didn't have any last year because of the pandemic, but there are, I'm sure, a number of people in the congregation who have dedicated years in service to this community. The ones that came to mind immediately for me, particularly following the roof project and also the generosity team, and also in membership efforts, are Sue and Larry Kierson, and Dave and Rilla Fox. And in a one that I've been thinking about, and I'll just put this out there for you to think, we're not making any decisions tonight. Susan and Fritz Franson, although Fritz has not been active during the last 5 or 6 years, but in terms of the history of the fellowship, he and Susan have put tremendous energy, time, talent, and treasure into this community. And Fritz has returned to the fold, although not formally, and I think an acknowledgement of them may be in order. So those are the ones that I've been thinking of, and I would invite you to consider it. There's not, the process is once the board decides, I contact people to see if they're willing to accept this designation. Most people say that doesn't mean I'm not going to give, and we say that is totally fine with us. We would love you to continue to give. But that is the purpose of tonight's short conversation. Do you have any questions?
Can you say the names again?
The ones that I have been thinking of are Sue and Larry Kierson, Dave and Rilla Fox, and Susan and Fritz Franson.
So I see Chris nodding.
This would be on the agenda next month for a vote. And also if other members of the board have recommendations, you can make them tonight or to share them with ELT for our meeting at the end of this month.
Any comments from anybody?
I'll just say that I support, I don't feel I've been here long enough to know the long-term efforts of some folks, but Dave Fox and Rilla I've seen in action, and the other two, I've just forgotten their names, but
Sue and Larry and Fritz
Sue
and
and Larry.
Susan.
Sue and Larry I've seen in action just this year, and so anyway, I would support those two if they were raised next time for a vote.
Any others?
I would just say they all seem like very worthy candidates, knowing all the things they've all done for this congregation.
The conversation's tricky. There's a lot of worthy people in our congregation.
Anybody else?
Is Lotus Miller also a lifetime member or a?
She is already a lifetime member, lifetime honorary.
If you give me just a minute, I will pull up the list. It's not very long.
I know Sam's on there.
Yeah.
Sam Wormley.
Irv Klaus.
And Mary Richards.
Mary Richards.
Those are the ones I remember that are still alive.
Okay, so there's Bonnie Bowen, Barney Cook, before he passed away, Lotus Miller, Bobby Warman, and then Irv, Mary, and Sam. So it's a fairly short list so far.
Okay. All right, well then we can vote on that next meeting. So the next item on our agenda is the proposed offertory recipients. And Bradley's got that one.
So we just launched the repository for people's ideas for offertory recipients, which is in your chat. It was in the last weekly email. So if you have ideas of other nonprofits that you feel we should support through our offertory split, please visit that and drop them in. If you would like to know about our recent history for giving, it's here somewhere. It's on the social justice tab of the website. but I can also drop that in the chat too to make it a little easier. It's not a nice, pretty address, but that gives you an idea. It's got the last 6 years on it, and the amounts that have gone to them, so you can see which ones have been a little more successful and which ones have not been as successful. But basically, we're just here tonight to put a plug in for it. So if you have ideas, because if we don't get many ideas by the time we need to, the board will get to take care of that. So if you have ideas, if you're talking to other groups and you're in other groups, please have them submit their ideas as well.
Thanks, Bradley. Have you been having any suggestions?
We have 0 responses so far.
Okay.
I just sent one.
I had a question. Were we going to still have the youth be able to pick 1 or 2?
I would think that would make sense. Yeah, last year what we did was we didn't have a ton of suggestions, and so we kind of just laid out the others how it seemed to make sense, and then there turned out to be extra openings, and so we said, sure, why not? We've had both RE students, we've had youth group choose in the past. We've also had secret friends vote on it. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to definitely at least have 1, if not multiple ones for that.
So Jane, are you saying that you'd like that to have that option?
Yeah, I think it's nice to be able to let them have a voice in this whole process.
Okay.
Yeah,
Chris?
and in fact, if you missed Sunday service, watch the weekly email for the service link, and at least watch through until we get to the offertory part, because the kids did a really cute video that was included in the service.
Chris, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, when the question, or when Bradley made the statement that no one had made any suggestions yet, and I said that I just did it a couple of seconds ago.
Very good. Very good. All right. It looks like it is time to talk about the fiscal year 22 budget.
Okay, that's my turn. First
Yep,
of
that'd be
all,
you.
first time for me, so go ahead and ask me any question or direct me what you want out of this meeting here. Everybody has a chance to look at the budget or have it in front of them. So thank you, Bradley, for providing the pledges estimation that we have so far. We updated the estimation of the pledges to 287,000. That's right on the top, the first number. And based on that pledges and how we laid out the budget, currently we still have a deficit of 36,400 and a few more. In the past, we always did have a deficit in the budget, but it turned out that we didn't use up all of the budget, and it turned out that in the past we always were positive of the actual usage of the money. In response to that, a change that happened this year is we reduced the expenditure for things like snow service, because that was budgeted way higher than the actual cost. So that helped us to lower the budget, as you see here, a little bit. And yeah, that's the main part that I wanted to point out. So there is already a slight deduction on how it was in the past, just so you're aware, to include that in your consideration, whether or not it's okay, the budget as it is right now. In general, the budget is fairly lean, and one of the ideas is also to cover the deficit if necessary with the funds that haven't been used from the current fiscal year. Right now, it sounds like we have a surplus of 40K, although some of that I heard was being used for something else, and the actual surplus is really 20K or so. I think Bob might know more detail about that than I do. But that was one of the ideas on how to ensure that the budget could be covered. In the future, Stephanie was mentioning something about potentially using some of the A&D money for funding position specific, the membership position or the RE position. But that's not part of the discussion in the 2020 fiscal year. Instead, that would be something to discuss whether or not that is of interest for 2023. And also for 2023 and going forward, you probably know that already, just the goal of the membership and membership increase and our just in contribution increase on that would be beneficial. So, Alice, is there any specific items that you would like to talk about in the budget?
Klaus, would you like to explain about these one-time savings, like for, say, the medical and salaries, and for the membership coordinator? What do the one-time savings do for the budget?
Yeah, the one-time savings, if you look at those lines, those are highlighted in gray, where you see the change that increased quite a bit. That was from the savings that we had last year. So they kind of we don't have those savings in the next budget year anymore. So that's why you see that dollar amount increase there. So it's basically back to normal compared to our current fiscal year. The same thing down on the utilities, on the one-time savings that we have. As mentioned though, on the utilities, the budgeting has been adjusted down as well, so it's more realistic on how much the utilities do cost.
By averaging out the past 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even though I did hear on the news that the gas costs are going to go up this winter. So I don't know how much that will affect our budget, but I don't know if that we'll have to take that into account in our budget. But
we've over budgeted pretty significantly for utilities for a long time, so it's probably okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just jump in here. I think just to say, okay, this budget, if I were to make an overarching statement, includes a bit of risk. We have tuned it more closely and taken out a lot of items that we've had some slack in prior years, and given the current pledge number that we have, unless that goes up, we would be planning to have an overrun of $36,000 based on the current version of the budget. Now, we do need to take that in concert with information like this year. We had many projects going on we did have for a time we expected about a $40,000 underrun, meaning we were going to have some leftover. And so when Klaus mentions that we may be able to use some of what's left there, we also may have some underrunning items next year, but it's less likely because we have tuned the budget closer to reality in a variety of ways. And so, is that fair to say, Klaus and Chris?
Yes. And the
Well,
kind of-
I'll also mention that we are changing the way that we do pledging. And we all know probably that nowadays we sent an email out to everybody and invited everybody to sign up for being a sustaining contributor or a sustaining member. And not everybody got the email. So we're sending emails out again, but also following up with snail mail. Not everybody opened their email. So I still think that we're still to receive some pledges. Bradley, what do you think?
The pledge figure that is given in the budget is an estimate based on previous pledging. So it's kind of a hopeful thought, thinking that folks will continue contributing at the same level.
So it's kind of a projection between what we've received already plus what we anticipate?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. It is definitely on the higher end of
Okay.
my adjustment as of today. For frame of reference, let's see here. So this is an idea of where things have landed over the last several years. And the blue section here is talking about what was budgeted versus what was realized. So our average over 6.5 years is to have a surplus of $20,000 per year. So it's all kind of a crapshoot, for lack of a better term at the moment. It could turn out any kind of way, really. But we historically have had very what has felt like scary budgets that have turned out pretty well in the end.
But we've also had, some lines with some surplus on them that we may not have in fiscal year in the current.
In this
planning.
coming year.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
So
we
that may
are, making
reduce-
certain assumptions about the pandemic, for example, and that there aren't going to be any other big unexpected expenses.
So just an aside, well, the first time around, there was a member who commented on a budget where we had budgeted, I think it was 10 or 12,000 overrun. That was the first time I was here, so that was 2 years ago, I think. And there was a member who was concerned about doing that for 10,000, and I'm just worried that if we have a budget hearing, we'll hear a lot more about 36,000. So that's something we may need to address in the meantime.
Mhm.
Yeah. As far as budgets are concerned, the highest we've gone was last year. Sorry, no. what's this year's? I don't have it up anymore. 2020, we went up to just over $9,000 in a budget deficit. The year before was 8,800, the year before was 5,100, and then it's significantly less
Mhm.
before. So,
Projected deficits, but we still end up with a surplus.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
obviously our budget in the past and currently kind of has the problem that we are passing a budget that's negative and we end up with way too much surplus, which doesn't quite jive. So there's like a humongous difference between budgeted and reality. And really the goal is to create a budget that's very close to reality and being able to balance the budget as well on it.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of unknowns, you know, for expenses that may occur throughout the year, like, for example, utilities. So I think it would be prudent for us to over budget than under budget.
And
But at the same time, is it beneficial to over budget and pass a negative budget versus a budget that is more closer to being balanced? I mean, I understand that it also looks very bad if you ever go negative and don't meet your budget.
So we could frame it as the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And we do have resources to cover a deficit of that size, even though it's very unlikely that we would realize that deficit of that size. So that's how we could frame that.
One
So-
comment around, go ahead, Sarah, sorry.
Well, I was just looking at the pledges. So our budget was 289,451 for this year. And are we looking like we're coming in or over on that?
We're right on target.
We're right on target.
We're just slightly over.
Okay. And what we're looking at in our estimation is actually down from where we think we're going to come in this year. So we're looking like we're not going to be able to even do what we did this year by just a couple thousand, I guess. So I'm just saying what I'm seeing and wanting confirmation on that. And the other question I had was the membership coordinator. Can you speak to that? Is that person in the budget or not in the budget? Or that position?
So it is in the budget. Funding membership coordinator at halftime for a full year. It's just below line 5120-101.
Yeah.
It's on that offset line. There's a note out on the right. So it's a halftime for a full year in the current budget.
So a halftime, mean half a year of somebody for how many hours a week?
It means a halftime
20.
position for the full year.
20 hours.
20 hours a week. Okay. All right. Because in past discussions, we've talked about having a membership coordinator can help with membership. And we haven't been able to, right, what Chris is showing us with his fingers. We haven't been able to fund, fill, pandemic, whatever, and put attention to that and the care and feeding of membership to be able to see some results financially. So the thought is by investing in that, we could maybe reap more benefit as far as increased pledges with increased members. Okay, I just wanted to be sure that's what I'm understanding. All right. So 20 hours a week is more than what we had planned.
That can't be right. It's got to be.
Because I don't remember it
it's
being
somewhere
that much.
It's somewhere between 10 and 15 hours.
Okay. All right.
At least if we're talking what we've kind of established as our house minimum of $15 an hour. Otherwise, you're talking $9 an hour, and good luck.
Or I'm wondering if that was half-time for half a year, Klaus. What do you think?
It was Stephanie who mentioned it, if I remember.
Yeah, so.
Okay, Stephanie.
We'd have to look back at the documents to verify. I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Brady. Sorry about that.
So when Emily was here, how many hours did she work?
A long time ago, I think 15.
15, and that had increased from a real minimal amount
Mhm.
before that. Okay.
Mhm.
And so what we're looking at is between 10 and 15 is what you thought, Bradley? For this
Sure.
next fiscal year?
For what do you mean 10 and 15? 10 and 15 what?
Hours a week?
Oh,
Or that's what I'm not clear on.
so I think what was originally proposed was 15 hours a week for the whole year at $15 an hour,
Okay. And what this is showing would be,
which would be $11,700.
and so this would be 15 hours a week, but just for half a year.
Okay, I looked up the 2020 staff budget draft that we have in Google Drive. Mike, if you want to look at it too. There it says membership coordinator, salary wages, $15 per 15 hours per 52 weeks. Comes to 11,700.
So, but what this is showing is just half of the year. Am I understanding that right or not?
No,
No?
half would be 5,500 plus 350, so 5,850. So it's like 3/4 of the year.
So we would have somebody for 3/4 of the year.
Yeah,
So-
as per
Ish.
current budget, but we may want to update that number.
Yeah.
Understand it better.
So, yeah, I
Mhm.
guess I'd like to know when we'd anticipate hiring that person. Because the budget won't get approved until December, so then we'd have to advertise and it might not get filled until the middle of March. And then the year kind of winds down, and so then in the fall, we'd need like a lot of time. I'm just thinking about the workload and how additional members could be schmoozed.
As long as we are having 25 people in Fellowship Hall up to 40, the schmoozing opportunities are limited. But I do think it's important to fill that position as soon as we can, because to have the opportunity to spend time with that person and have a process and also how we approach relationship building with visitors is something that I was not able to have with Emily before I went on sabbatical. So and we have no idea, we have no control or knowledge of when the pandemic will ease up so that we can go to being fully open.
Mhm.
But hopefully, I'm still hopeful that we'll get there sooner than later.
Okay. Are there other questions people have regarding the budget as proposed? Okay.
I have one thing that probably doesn't really fit into it. It's not really part of the finance committee, but one line item is the Pride will likely not being supported. I'm just trying to highlight the concern that maybe somebody might have seen that and wondering why that's not being funded anymore. If there needs to be some communication about that, just to indicate the reason and the stance of the church, whether or not they still, not that we are not that the UUFA said gives kind of a wrong signal to somebody that isn't in the loop and thinks that we're not supporting all gender orientations anymore, or something like that.
Yeah, we'll smooth out the comment when it comes time. I think in the past we've used the community outreach to fund Pride or sponsor something for Pride, but when it was originally worked into the budget, it wasn't necessarily specifically for that. It was for any kind of community outreach that we wanted to do. I think the comment, I'm not exactly sure where it came from. My conversation with Stephanie was that it sure seems like the Ames Pride organization is struggling right now with coming up with leadership and getting things off the ground. And it's just not a quality investment. I mean, they're uncommunicative. They drop things all the time. They're just going through a hard time. They need to kind of figure some stuff out before it makes sense to sponsor again. That doesn't mean we can't support them maybe on a smaller level, but that was my own feeling, at least.
That's a great point, though, Klaus. We should be sure that we're clear on what the budget is communicating when we provide it to the membership.
Mhm. Any other comments or questions? 35,000 is kind of scary. All
Do
right.
you have any direction that the budget committee, the finance committee should go with the budget for the next meeting? Should we try to make any kind of an adjustment or anything else?
Well,
Chris?
one thing I might suggest is to do a projected rollover from 2021 and add that into income, so that it would reduce the projected deficit. Is that possible?
Yes, I mean, it still feels like there are some big wild cards, which you'll get to later tonight. But in theory, yes, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Anybody else? All
I think
right.
one last item, sorry, Sarah.
Okay.
Would be just to consider, to have the finance committee consider if there are any areas that the board should consider reducing based on finance committee knowledge. And then the board can decide priorities and things later.
Is that it? All right. Thank you, Klaus, for
Thank you, Klaus.
presenting and for your leadership. And this looks like it was a lot of work and a lot of discussion and a lot of sweat.
I got a lot of help from the finance committee, so thanks to all the
Good.
members.
Yeah, you've got some good people. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And we will move on to congregational survey.
All right. Well, I sort of drew the easiest slides to analyze, slides 43 through 46. If you look at them, they're all fairly straightforward, but slides 43 and 44 were addressing which issues the fellowship felt was important. And we can talk about to what extent we should use these levels of importance to determine our funding, our decision-making, squeaky wheels versus overall priorities. But just adding them up by eye, climate change was far and away the one that most people felt was the most important. There were far and away the largest number of people who said that it was very important. By my eyeball math, I had that at about 88% of people said that it was somewhat or very important. Next in line, with 79% somewhat or very important, was Black Lives Matter, race, that whole category of issues. That had 9% fewer total people who said it was somewhat or very important, but about 20% less people said that it was very important. That might simply be the demographics of our fellowship. Immigration was maybe 73%. LGBTQ issues were maybe 63%. COVID was also about that 63%, but less people marked it as very important. And Amos and the partner church had more people saying that it was neutral or unimportant than people saying that it was important. So if we were going just off that list of the top 5 things that we ought to worry about based on that list, it's climate change, Black Lives Matter, immigration, LGBT, and COVID. Now we're already working on COVID, obviously. I don't have any recommendations to do off of that list, other than we should think about whether we want to use that list as a list of our own funding priorities, our own airtime priorities. Of more immediate importance were slides 45 and 46, which directly addressed the 8th principle. And of those responses, more than 50% of them said that we should absolutely adopt it already. There were some more who said talk about it. There were some undecided. There were less than 5% who said we should not adopt. Looking through the relevant comments, I figured that about 2/3 of the relevant comments were something along the lines of that the 8th principle is unnecessary because its content is already covered by the existing 7 principles. Which in my mind is an interesting question for UU theologians to chew on. But that doesn't really answer the questions for us. There was only one comment that I saw that was directed strictly against the 8th principle. And the way I read it is that they were sort of inaccurately conflating the 8th principle with some of the stated goals of the Black Lives Matter organization. And that they were saying we shouldn't do the 8th principle because Black Lives Matter says this, this, and this, which I disagree with. So it wasn't, to my reading, directly related to the 8th principle itself. So we have 79 or 80% of the congregation says that race is somewhat or very important. We have more than 50% of respondents say that we should absolutely adopt the 8th principle already. You put those together and that seems like it's time for a vote. What discussion we want to have from this point forward with the congregation, in my mind, would be how do we implement the 8th principle if we approve it, not should we approve it in and of itself. Did anyone else have a different take on on those slides.
I spoke up earlier, Sam, and my thought was I haven't actually read the 8th principle since then, and it has been a changing document to some degree. And there was mention that that there were additional materials coming out of UUA, and I'm not sure of what those exactly were, if those were just training materials or if there was some change to the 8th principle itself. And for me, I think I would like it to be more settled, or we could decide on something similar to the 8th principle, or what the one that exists today, and then we could adapt later if we choose to do that.
Just to offer a little clarity on your questions, Mike, the language of the 8th principle has not changed. That will be the work of the next 2 General Assemblies in terms of wordsmithing and debating how that should be worded before it's put to a vote. The materials that you refer to are primarily training materials because the UUA has recognized that widening the circle of concern is a very tough document for a congregation to study. And they are working on a much more functional way to approach the materials, which actually widening the circle of concern, although it's foundational to the 8th principle, isn't exclusively about the 8th principle. So I think that we do need to proceed with that training. And looking back, I had originally was of the opinion that that training should probably, most congregations have a congregation-wide study and education process prior to full approval of implementing. Implementing is the interesting word is implementing, supporting, or I think there's a vote that we can have without a full adoption. That I had a word just a second ago. I think it's a worthy question. It's an essential question, and I do think that we'll get there. But in terms of actually adopting the principle, I think we might be a little bit premature. There's a big difference between truly understanding what that means and feeling that we have to adopt it.
Like with the other principles, isn't there a lot of internal freedom as to how we choose to adopt it, or how we choose to interpret and use those principles to guide our day-to-day decision making? I guess what I'm personally seeing is that the principle as written is pretty vague, like the other 7. And the questions of how do we implement those principles are a secondary question after we decide that this is a worthy goal. In the same way that any of the other 7, we can argue about how to best implement them. Does this proposed plan agree with these principles or not? But the questions of implementation are separate from the stated goal of the principle itself. And I think I don't think that we should delay the vote on the principle because we don't have the implementation worked out yet.
No, I agree with that. I just think that this is the first time, to my knowledge, the principles, this is a big deal to add another principle. But that is actually, this is the first time to my knowledge that there's been a grassroots project of congregations adopting it prior to the national body actually voting on it. So what we vote on is probably going to, I mean, they are debating, there will be debates as to whether that should actually be the overriding introduction to the principles, that every principle currently approved be filtered through the 8th principle. So when that takes place in 2 years, we will no doubt need to go back and revote our adoption of the principle, because the principle will have changed, or we will have a set of principles that will be in conflict with the national set of principles, which would be a uniquely and interesting Unitarian Universalist position to take, and complicated. So
but the alternative is to disappoint those members who are already disappointed at how long it has taken us to adopt the 8th principle, and telling them that we're going to not take any definitive action on it now, and we're going to chew on it for a while longer. I mean, pushing it back to this annual meeting was already plan B in their mind. This was already the fallback position. Remember, we had youth members who wanted to have this vote occurring in April. And we pushed back and said that we probably should think about this and work on it, and you know, that we didn't anticipate happening before the annual meeting. But if not the annual meeting, then that it's going to cause problems. I know that there are people who are going to be deeply upset by this if we don't at least put it on the agenda to vote for.
I think you're going to see both sides. You're going to see people who are very accustomed to and used to having study and discussion around these kinds of topics, these kinds of major adoptions, who will feel like this is out of the blue. I mean, even if we start a study next week, that's still pretty quick. I mean, it's a little over a month. And then on the flip side, you're going to have the people you were just talking about who feel like it's too slow. There's always going to be someone who's unhappy. I think, though, it might be prudent to try to at least have some concrete action. So at least get a study going, a discussion group or something, at the very minimum, that supports this kind of initiative.
Sam, you're making some great points here. I agree that we have folks that are in that state. I agree that we have a congregation who almost overwhelmingly supports, as it was written and as it currently is written. But yeah, we have this sort of conflict with what the UUA might do in the future. And I'm wondering if what Kent maybe hinted to, if there's some middle road where we do some level of adoption that maybe doesn't raise to principle, but raises to our values and our principles. I don't know what how that would work, or I'm not too great on the procedure here, but. Or we could adopt and change. That's another option. A bit complicated.
What about a multiple choice question? Don't adopt now, or study further?
I agree with you, Sam, that we should put this on our agenda. And I think it could open a really long-winded debate at our meeting, or not. It'll add some interesting dynamics for the parliamentarian and for Sarah to manage the meeting. Having that many options, that's a lot of options. I wonder if there's something about a way that we can find a wording that would fundamentally support the adoption of the 8th principle pending the work of the General Assembly.
Maybe make it an internal principle first, pending consideration of it as part of the wider list of principles. So UUFA principle.
What's
Question mark.
do we have any kind of sense as to where the national setting is, where they sit with this? I know there is a movement that's against it, but I believe that that's fairly small. Am I correct in that? I mean, is this likely to, this is likely to be approved? It'll just probably be tweaked, or you know, that lens framework that you were talking about earlier.
The group that there is a, I think it's bigger than a splinter group, but there is a fundamental debate in debating whether we are falling away from the democratic process as an institution of the principle on democracy. That some people, there's a group, I don't agree with their position, but I think the board of the UUA is full steam ahead. And I believe that the majority of the delegates are certainly in favor of moving towards adoption. And the congregational adoption of the principle is being used as a communication tool to the wider institution of the strength of commitment to pushing this principle into acceptance. So where I get hung up is the congregations that have adopted this, by and large, have engaged a year at least of study as a congregation. And we have had no time of study and maybe 3 sermons on 2 specifically addressing it. And I know that Passion is wanting to push this through. So I would leave it to you, board. Do you want to put this forward to the congregation looking for a support of adoption, a vote of intention to study and adopt, or a 3-part question as Sam had proposed? These are all great questions to wrestle with. And I would hope that our congregation would wrestle with them with as much integrity and respect as we are doing here.
It's unfortunate that we are, on this particular issue, this is not likely to be a congregational unanimous decision. You know, with our annual meetings are lovely when everyone raises their hand and gives a thumbs up, and there's no debate, there's no contention, there's no stress. It's all just formality. But I don't believe that we have that option on this issue now. I don't think that we will have that option on this issue any number of years from now. And again, whether this is the right time or not, we sent out a survey. More than half of the people who bothered to respond said absolutely adopt now. Whether we like it or not, in my mind, that means we need to give them the opportunity to vote.
Yeah, I don't think DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really all that controversial. And I think that most of our membership would be supportive of it.
I would rather we spend our time arguing about the implementation of the goal, because I can imagine implementations that are great. I can imagine implementations that are terrible and destructive. But that's, again, a separate question then.
Okay, because I was just confused by what you said. That you
Sorry.
would, about arguing the implementation of it, because I wouldn't want to argue the implementation of it at
As
a
with
board
any-
meeting.
No, but as a
I mean,
congregation, the congregational discussion, the ongoing, should be
ongoing, yeah, I
lifelong.
wouldn't want to
Discussion should
argue
be-
it at a congregational meeting, though, the implementation.
No,
Okay.
I'm saying we shouldn't have the implementation even
Okay,
under discussion for the annual meeting.
mhm.
This is a principle, and then the board, in conjunction with the UU,
Okay, yeah,
whoever can
I
figure out
agree with what you're saying. It was just confusing to me when the way you said it,
I'm sorry.
or the way I heard it. Because I thought it was conflicting with what you said earlier.
That's an odd thing. I don't think many will have an issue. I mean, we had 3 people make a comment about it, and that's a segment, but a very small segment. It would overwhelmingly, if evidence holds, it would overwhelmingly pass. We have this strange situation where, we agree with it, but there are processes and procedures. And one question I have is, is what we've provided to the congregation sufficient for them to make that decision?
Fundamentally, it's just a block of text. It's a sentence. Slightly long run-on sort of sentence, but a sentence. And all we're saying is this a principle that we want to affirm and promise to support? Any of the other decisions, the other sort of larger materials about it, are materials about implementation. But I don't know what other materials one could offer to address the principle itself. Can you think of something that you would that you might consider giving them?
Yeah, this is essentially what they read. I can't think of what we would provide them. Then for me, if this is all they would need, pending any further light and knowledge or change from the UUA, is there a way we can affirm rather than adopt official? I'm trying to think of a way that doesn't get askew from the UUA situation, but allows us to move forward in implementation.
If we did a vote to support the adoption, would be, I don't, supporting the adoption would be like supporting the adoption that the UUA adopt this principle. Is that what that would mean? Or is it that we at the UUFA are adopting this as our 8th principle?
The second part of what you said is accurate. It
So-
becomes a principle by which we agree that this is how we want to be in relationship with one another in this community.
Mhm. Okay, because I think that it needs to be clear of
And-
what we're putting, what we would put up.
And in terms of, I do believe that this congregation believes that it is committed to working to oppose racism and any oppressions. But I think that this congregation is still naive in terms of the privilege and entitlement we hold as white people. And it is a very difficult conversation that the hard work will come after it's approved.
Yeah.
But I think there's a certain tendency for many white Unitarian Universalists to see language like this and go, that's a nice thing, and we've approved these nice words there. We're not racist, we are anti-oppression, but the reality of it is nothing changes. So if the congregation votes this in, this becomes a rather significant change for how we're going to be hopefully grow in relationship. That's a good, and I'm not saying that as a negative, I'm saying that as a positive, but I'm saying it's extraordinarily hard work. And even as you all know, you can work on this work for 20 years and still be accused of being terrible at doing it.
Well, we can be accused of not being respectful and all the other principles as well.
Do that. So I'm
Because
gonna
principles are
stop.
principles and
Yeah.
things that we lean
Yeah.
into and what,
Yeah.
And
how,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop there
Yeah.
and again, just say,
yeah.
I do support the adoption of the 8th principle. I just don't think the congregation really understands what that means.
Yeah. And I think that was when we were talking about and the ELT, it seems like the words are good. What does this mean for us? By doing that is the piece we haven't talked about within the congregation. And those are the conversations that I wasn't sure our congregation is ready to make that vote. And I'm not saying I'm right. It's just, that's my perception. Like, what does this mean?
Well, I've got an idea. Sarah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, is that we still have about 2 months between now and then. And, maybe we can insert in Sunday services some of this discussion. And of course, I wouldn't presume to, make any, advice points on this for Sunday services, but at least I think that, upcoming Sunday services might be an opportunity to at least, prepare the fellowship for this discussion so that it's not a surprise, when it does come up for a vote, whether it's this year or next year. But
Except that we don't have 2 months. That would be able to start on the 1st. The services in October are full.
okay.
And planned.
Yeah.
And it would not be able, the The theme for November is healing. I have planned the first 2 weeks, but I could make some changes.
Could the last service in October, when we talk about future, incorporate a little bit, or is that all ready taken? Because Sue had asked about talking about the survey a little bit in that service, and this is again part of that survey for the future.
There are materials in the November Soul Matters packet on healing with regard to anti-racism, and I would be glad to use some of those in my services and give, you know, I don't know. I haven't talked with her about what she fundamentally hopes to accomplish in that service.
So I'm having two thoughts. One is democracy for me is voting with understanding. And I'm not sure our congregation understands what it means to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and institutions. I'm having a different thread that says, once we agree on the principle that we don't want oppression, then the hard work begins. And in that thread, we maybe ought to adopt and move forward with a strong, you know, program. So I'm trying to contribute the two opposing viewpoints that are running through my head right now.
Yeah. I'm right there with you, Mike. We don't have a good understanding of what this means in terms of the specific actions to dismantle racism and such in our institutions. But that is a question to be answered after we set that as the goal for ourselves. It's up to us. We choose for ourselves how we want to dismantle racism in our systems. That's not something that we need to receive from outside and do as we're told. We set our own committees. We choose our own approaches to such things once we set ourselves a goal.
Jane, did you have any thoughts?
You know, and I'm listening to hearing both sides of the coin, and I guess I'm leaning more towards us spending a little more time with educating and you know, learning a little bit more about it. I look at it as if the UUA is struggling and spending all this time with it. Obviously, I'm not sure that we're ready to just, you know, jump into it, but that I think, yes, more education is probably in order, more discussions. And I guess I'm leaning more towards that way. It's not saying, you know, we're not going to do this, but that, hey, this is a huge step. And I think I thought Mike said this so eloquently, that democracy is being educated and informed before we make that full decision. And I just don't think there's enough time between now and you know, December 12th to do that. So not saying that we won't do it down the road, but it just seems a little quick to me. So that's my 2 cents.
So we talked about some possible ways to do some education between now and the vote if we put this on the agenda. Is doing some things in a Sunday service enough? or a couple Sunday services in educating. Can we do that between now and then? Is there someone who has some bandwidth to help with that? And
Wish I could, but I'm super busy as it is.
so are some of the people who support this strongly people that could be tapped to help?
I think they tried to put that effort in back in January when they first brought it to the board's attention.
So are you talking about the youth?
They were the first ones to bring this to the board.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
submitted it to the board and said, we want to do this. What do we need to do? How do we push this through? And for all the things that have happened since then, they're not here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm trying to a certain extent, carry on the enthusiasm that I received from them, but they've given up on this approach, I think. Again, it was the January meeting when they first asked us to do something about this, and we've been putting it off since then. We have chosen, I guess, whether, I don't know who was making all the decisions or through what process, but we have had a couple of services since then on the subject, and that's as far as we took it. In January, we talked that, well, maybe we can get this done before the November annual meeting, and if we can get it done before then, great. But if not, then we'll do it at the annual meeting. Now we're looking at the annual meeting. I'm sorry, but
the process that the board agreed to was the board doing a study, and nobody came. Like, this group of people needs to own that. Like, and it's a hard discussion, and it was at a particularly painful point, but it's that threw off the whole rest of the thing. It wasn't just powers that be or anything like that. It was this group.
No, it was us. But we've chosen not to talk about it. We've chosen not to push on it, and here we are.
Not without trying, though. I mean, I put a lot of work together to put that study for this group. And the plan was, after this group studied it, was for the congregation to study it. And in the meantime, we had a pandemic and some upheaval.
That's right.
That made the conversation even more painful than it was. Now, the language of pushing through is language that I struggle with, because pushing through, I mean, this is a big decision. It's not something that we push through. It's something that I want approved. It's something that I want done. And if you want to put it on the agenda on a yes or no basis, we can do that. I think that it will have a really it'll create a lot of extra work that many of us aren't prepared to do, including the whole congregation. Now, I would be glad to do services in November, but those are in order to do that, you need to understand that will require a complete 180 in services that I've already started preparing for November, 3 of them. And the extra time that it'll take means that I won't be able to help people. I'm putting in between 10 and 20 hours a week on services that aren't my responsibility. So in order to, and that's not a complaint, because my job here is to make sure that people succeed. But this is adding a lot to my plate, knowing that something else will have to give. Willing to do it, you just need to know that there's a cost involved, a non-financial cost. It's not a budget implication.
What if we were to offer, going back to the triple option, but narrowing it down a little bit? What if we had no, yes today, or study more on it and vote on it on a special meeting on this date? So we have time to prepare. We have as many services and outreach activities as people are interested in doing. But if we don't get it approved this November, we have a date set where we will take that yes or no vote.
Well, I was going to suggest that and not to kick down the can down the road, but because of the circumstances that we have had to deal with this past year, that we reschedule the actual vote for December 2022. But we start doing a lot of assertive, aggressive preparation with the fellowship to address this question over the next 14 months, including a robust discussion in December without actually taking a vote. So that's just another suggestion. I don't know. But this has been a challenging year for all of us. So.
I mean, I completely agree, Ken. We haven't had as much discussion of that as we could. And if there's more beneficial discussion either in services or study groups to be had, then we should absolutely do it. But I think that those members who are demanding that we do something more, if we vote to set a date when we will finally answer the question, that might be enough to satisfy some of them to some extent.
Yeah, as in December 2022, at least we could put something on the calendar that says, yes, we are going to vote on this in next year's annual meeting. We promise.
So like a resolution to spend a year of study with the goal of voting for this at the end of 2022. So they'd be voting on a resolution, because doesn't the UUA do that? Like, this is our study question, and
Congregational study action item.
but then it goes further to with the goal of voting.
I'm going to still be
with a
here, but I'm going to look something up before I continue. You can go ahead and keep talking.
So is that kind of what you're suggesting, Sam?
Yes, but I mean, I don't like a year from now timeline. We've already had almost a year. That seems too long. That seems kicking the bucket or kicking the can too far down the road. But if we think that we need to have a bit more discussion time, then we can give them that option. I do think that from the survey alone, we should also give the option of voting yes this meeting. I mean, I think that we have already collected enough congregational information. We've already had enough congregational discussion. There are a number of people who are ready to say yes today. There are probably some more who are still on the rocks. And if maybe you phrase it as two separate questions. Maybe question one is, should we adopt this today? And then question two is, if the first resolution doesn't pass, should we set a date next spring or something on which we will have a congregational vote to allow us more time for study and discussion? Because I am personally not comfortable with telling, through our actions, telling them, yeah, y'all said you wanted to vote for it now, but we're not going to let you. Even if that first resolution fails, I feel like in good conscience, it needs to be there for them to vote on no, if they want more discussion.
So I'm looking at the board goals and reading the 8th principle goal here. It says, educate congregation on 8th principle, discuss adopting. And I remember the conversation around that. It was me that didn't feel comfortable saying, adopt it by December, which is what the request was from the youth group. And I think that's why it's written that way. So the official document is not to adopt by December, understanding that may not be the understanding of some folks.
I'm thinking through everything here, and I'm wondering if there's I'm agreeing with Sam that there may be some value in putting the option for adoption now and an option to study deeply for 1 year. And I think those would, they're fairly broadly apart, but I think too many options is even more confusing than, yes, we're ready to do this. No, we think we need to study it more. And I think that will be a more specific question than the survey offered, but it will give us the opportunity to pass it and then jump into the fire, or agree to study it for a year and jump into the same fire. And I'm not saying I should word that differently. Jump into the opportunity to become better Unitarian Universalists. But it's hard work.
I kind of like the way you worded that, Kent, with 2 options.
Yeah,
it does take the air out of the hard nose. Like the people who are absolute no's, because there's at least one of them that we know of. It takes the wind out of their sail, which is good.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm just going to tell you, my biggest fear is wordsmiths. People in our congregation love to wordsmith, and it makes a decision go down the toilet and never get anywhere fast. And my fear is I don't want that to happen at the annual meeting.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Sarah.
I just, and I know that's one of the conversations across the UUA and criticisms about this. People don't like the words. And if that people start bringing that up, that would indicate to me we need more discussion. But I just don't want to have the wordsmith discussion at the annual meeting, if that makes sense.
I think one way to address that, Sarah, and thank you for bringing it up, is any statement with regard to adoption should include language that says that we will upgrade our language to match that of the national body if and when it's approved. That, you know, we accept the language now. We adopt the proposed language, which will be updated should the national body change the wording.
You'll never get people on board with that. Just handle it one thing at a time. If it gets changed, we'll just adopt
We'll
a
deal.
revision.
Yep, good point. That just I just muddied the water. Skip that. Thank you. Getting
Well,
late.
And just getting the agenda approved at the beginning of the meeting. Could be a difficult thing. All right, so where are we here?
I'm going to
So-
stick with my recommendation to either approve and adopt the 8th principle or approve that we engage a year of study and vote to approve in December 22.
Adopt as is written here.
Yeah, adopt now or study for a year. Those two options.
I would go with that too.
I would too. I like that.
I'm all right with that.
Mike,
I'm there. Yep, I'm there as well.
all right,
Well, I can't propose this. It needs to come from one of you, but thank you. This has been a really rich and difficult conversation. Thank you.
and I really appreciate that you brought this up, Sam. And
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this is not a fun conversation for anyone, and there's nothing easy about this, and it's going to cause stress, and I apologize for that, but we
it's not,
need to have it in there somewhere. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Shall I make that motion, I guess? That the meeting agenda include the option to either A, approve the 8th principle as written immediately, or B, to set that question aside for a year of study and discussion.
So moved.
Second, that was a second, move in a second. Okay, and it sounds like we are all in agreement on that. That's good. All right,
Are there
Woohoo.
any other additions to the agenda in this first reading? Okay, if any pop up, please let ELT know.
okay, we have one last thing on this agenda is the cottage meetings back in July, I believe it was, the retooling group that had been meeting for 4 months diligently with other folks across with 3 other congregations and looking at different goals. The retooling group had suggested that we have cottage meetings to further discuss the survey, because we've had an opportunity as a board now, as of tonight, to talk about all the survey results and look at what possible actions we want to take and that the congregation needs to look at based on that information. And the retooling group had thought that the next step would be to have some cottage meetings and discussions with the full congregation about some of these action items and things that we can be taking as a result of the survey to create some synergy and some movement forward from the survey. And when we talked about it in July, nobody wanted to do that. We had talked about having some discussions after the service. Is that right, Kent? on various aspects of the survey, like religious education, like more member engagement kinds of things, and having smaller groups talking about this. And so I'm bringing it up again because at the time in July, they said it was, we don't have the time to do it. There's not enough people. There's RE's not around, families aren't there. We have other stuff on our agenda. And so I guess I'd like to know what the board feels about that now. As far as furthering what we do with the survey.
So Sarah, is the question about including groups of membership in that process? Or is the question more about just how we move forward in general?
Well, what the retooling group had asked for was doing cottage type of meetings. And they could be in-person meetings, they could be Zoom meetings, they could be meetings separate from the Sunday services. They could be after a Sunday service, but they could be other times with other groups.
And the result of those meetings would be a set of suggestions from those folks about what they would like to see going forward.
Getting more commitment, wider commitment, some excitement about some of these ideas. And we can table this for the next meeting. And it would be something I think that the next board would need to then move forward on or not move forward on.
I think it's a good idea.
I have a question. Can the retooling committee have something to do with helping spearhead this? I mean, yes, I know this is sort of our thing that we started with it, but I mean, we're all pretty committed with things. And I'm just wondering, to get more buy-in from other people, is there another, could their committee help with this?
Well, the retooling committee included me, Kent, Jamie, and Amy Slagle.
Oh.
So do I have the energy?
Oh.
I do not have the energy to manage this and would be stepping back. This would be one of the things that I would be removing from my plate. I was glad to be part of the group, glad to bring the information to the board, but I'm going to pass it off because I'm moving into 8th principle.
Can I ask how much more of it, other than drumming up some excitement, which I can see, how much more value does that add than having the congregation give the input in the survey in the first place?
We haven't really shared the results with them at all.
Right. That'd be one thing. We haven't shared the results with them. And the other would be right now, we lack commitment on people and initiative on people by people to flourish and come up with fresh ideas. And it's the same old people doing things. And so the idea would be by getting input from a lot of people, there'd be more excitement and hopefully more people to jump on some of the things that we as a board have been talking about now for 5-6 months.
I'm trying to think how to orchestrate those in a hybrid or, all online or partially online scenario. And also, it occurs to me that it's not a short set of data. It's 50 slides, and some of those are quite packed. and there would be some doing to maybe tune it to a level that people, you know, would better grasp maybe, or I guess we could section it off like we have. So there's some challenges there, you know, over and above just the sharing it seems.
I'm sensing that we're all feeling a lot of fatigue right now, and we're not ready to make a decision on this, and maybe we should table it and move on.
Well, Sarah, I guess I was thinking, just kind of rattling around in the back of my mind, is the fact that, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but I attend probably about 10 to 15 meetings per week as is. And that probably goes for a lot of working people. And then the idea that for, you know, someone who is a working professional to add one more meeting on to their stack of responsibilities during the week is kind of hard. And so I'm just kind of wondering, you know, kind of where that might, you know, add to the fatigue that, you know, a lot of people might already have. Not to, you know, give a pass on, you know, people's responsibility and, you know, a commitment. I'm just, you know, I'm just throwing that out there.
Mhm.
Sorry, but that's just my top of the head comment that I had.
Well, I mean, the alternative, or an alternative, would be maybe having people take a much smaller chunk and record like a 1 or 2 minute little clip and hope that people look at it and that they respond to it. You're going to get a lot better, higher quality response in an actual sit down conversation. But an alternative could be used.
Yeah, that would require some, you know, some fairly, I mean, having distilled the survey results down to what's in the 50 slides, still what's in there is undistilled. It would take some doing to get it into several, you know, 2 minute videos or something. Yeah. As process observer, I'm going to point out that we're over time.
We're over time and we are supposed to have an executive session. So I would suggest that we table this and ELT can talk about it between now and then, and maybe the retooling group can give some input in between.
I would also, just to close the conversation on this, add that Sue Kerrison in the Service for the Future has invited Mike to be included in the service to talk some about the survey some. So that may be a means of introduction, not of covering the whole survey, but at least beginning the conversation as how we move into the future. And Mike, you and I and Sue can talk more about that.
5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, so process observers report.
We were on time and chugging forward until about 7:30, I believe it was. We went into some very challenging and fruitful discussion about the 8th principle. Thank you all for your thoughtful contributions there. And the last item, I think we were a bit tired for. And it's an item that could add additional work to a variety of palettes. And taking on one of those in a time when we're tired sometimes can be a challenge. So that's my report. I think we actually, one last thing, I think we all we had good input, good participation, and some solid comments.
Okay, anything else for the good of the fellowship? Thank you, Mike. Anything else you want to add, Bradley, for?
ELT meets October 27th, and our next board meeting is November 10th. That's all.
All right. So I will go ahead and finish out this meeting, and I'm trying to think of a way to do the executive session quickly. There's information to share, but we'll go into the executive session, and then if we decide we need to pause and reschedule, then we'll talk about that there. Okay.